Humble mother comforts a child. Without imagining who the man watching her was, before the story begins, tell me something. Where are you watching from? Leave it in the comments. I'd love to know how far these stories are reaching. And if you enjoy love stories full of emotion, twists, and heartwarming endings, subscribe to the channel. That really helps it grow and motivates me to keep bringing you stories that truly touch the soul. On that February dawn, the cold seemed to slice through the air like a thin blade. The automatic doors of Denver Airport opened and closed in an impersonal loop, letting in blasts of icy wind that chilled to the bone. Rachel Monroe walked briskly through the nearly empty terminal, her worn sneakers barely making a sound against the polished floor. She wore the navy blue uniform of the cleaning crew and carried a bucket of supplies. But what she carried most that night was worry. She had left her 9-month-old son Noah with a downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a 70-year-old woman who cared more for plants than for people, but who, out of necessity and compassion, had agreed to watch the baby for a few hours. In exchange for a few dollars and some groceries, Rachel had no choice. The rent was overdue, the electricity bill unpaid, and the overtime on the night shift was her only hope of keeping a roof over their heads. As she absent-mindedly cleaned a trash can near the international terminal, her eyes were drawn to a shadow near the large glass windows. It was a child small, with long, messy blonde hair and a pink backpack slumped beside the bench. She was curled up, hugging her knees, shivering. The scariest part, she was crying silently, eyes wide open and lips trembling, but not making a sound. Rachel looked around. No adults nearby. No security staff. Just the distant sounds of announcements and a vacuum cleaner somewhere down the hall. She dropped her rag, quickly pulled off her rubber gloves, and approached cautiously. "Hey, sweetheart, are you okay?" she asked softly, kneeling in front of the girl. The child didn't answer. Her blue eyes were frozen with fear, lost somewhere far away. Rachel took off her own sweatshirt stained at the sleeves, but still warm, and wrapped it around the girl's shoulders. "You're cold, huh? My name's Rachel. It's okay now, all right?" Still no answer. Just a held-back sob and a slow falling. Rachel sat down next to her on the cold floor, ignoring the ache in her knee. Gently she held the child's small, cold hand and softly rubbed her thumb over the tiny fingers. "I have a baby boy. His name is Noah. When he cries like this, quietly, it's because he's scared. Is that how you feel? Are you scared?" The girl nodded, barely noticeably. Rachel took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. A lump formed in her throat. "It's okay, You don't need to talk right now. Just stay here with me, okay? I'll stay with you as long as you need." Then, in a low voice, almost like a prayer, Rachel began to sing the same lullaby she sang to Noah on tough nights. "Sleep, my darling. Don't you cry, mama's near, and stars are high." The little girl slowly snuggled up next to her as if her body had finally found a safe harbor. Rachel wrapped her arms around her and caught the scent of children's shampoo mixed with the salt of tears. Her heart clenched. Who was this child? Why was she alone? Where were her parents? She looked around again, now more urgently. Still no sign of an adult nearby. Only then did she notice, in the distance, someone standing still. A tall man in a dark suit, unmoving, watching intently. But Rachel didn't focus on him just yet. All her attention was on the little girl in her arms. And for a brief moment, amid the biting silence of the airport and the cold lights of the international terminal, she allowed herself to simply feel. To feel that she had done what she could. That even with almost nothing, she had given everything. Rachel was still humming softly when she noticed a subtle movement coming from the edge of the glass corridor. The little girl in her arms, now nestled against her chest, had stopped trembling. Her small body was beginning to relax, as if this stranger, with work-worn hands and tired eyes, was the first safe presence she'd felt in a long time. Something in the air shifted. Rachel looked up, and then she saw it. About 50 feet away, a tall and imposing man appeared alongside two uniformed security guards. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit, even at that early hour, and his Italian shoes echoed firmly against the marble floor. He walked quickly, though not running. His eyes, a piercing greenish gray, were locked on the girl, and then on the woman kneeling beside her. Benjamin Whitaker came to a sudden stop. His breathing was labored, his phone still in hand, the emergency call having ended just seconds before. Sophie was there, but she wasn't crying. She was in the arms of a stranger, a uniformed woman kneeling on the floor, cheeks red from the cold and a kind expression on her face. "Mr. Whitaker, the girl is safe," one of the guards informed, stepping forward. "Shall we remove the employee?" Ben raised a firm hand, cutting him off. "No, not yet." His eyes narrowed, carefully assessing the scene. His daughter, the same one who, since her mother's funeral, had rejected all physical contact, even from her grandparents, was now allowing herself to be held by this stranger with ease. There was no fear in her face, no tension, only a quiet exhaustion, a hint of relief. Rachel noticed the men, but stayed calm. She felt an instinct to protect that child who wasn't hers. She spoke gently, unsure if she was being judged, tested, or merely watched. She was alone, crying silently. I just sat with her. "I'm sorry if..." Before she could finish, Ben stepped closer. His voice came out lower than he expected. "Her name is Sophie." Rachel nodded slightly. She hasn't spoken, but she answered with her eyes. Sophie gently squeezed Rachel's arm, as if silently confirming every word. Ben didn't respond right away. Inside, his world had been broken for 2 years. Since his wife's death, there hadn't been a single day he didn't feel guilty for always being absent, for not knowing how to deal with a grieving child. And now, here was his daughter, finding comfort in the arms of someone completely outside the glass and steel world he lived in. He looked directly at Rachel. "You're with the cleaning staff?" he asked, without apparent judgment. "I am. I work the night shift," she replied, standing up slowly, still holding Sophie. Ben noticed the worn knees of her pants, the scuffed sneakers, the hair held back by a crooked clip. Her face was plain, but beautiful, lit by a warmth he hadn't seen in a long time. Rachel gently handed Sophie over. She was cold. "I used my sweatshirt to cover her. I hope that's okay." Ben took his daughter in his arms, and for the first time in a long time, Sophie didn't pull away. She simply rested her head on his shoulder. Rachel tried to smile, though her throat felt tight. "She's a very strong little girl." Ben met her eyes, and for a moment, there was silence. "What's your name?" he asked. "Rachel Monroe." He nodded, as if committing that name to memory with more weight than she realized. Then he turned to the guard and murmured, "Take Sophie to the car. I'll be right there." Once alone with Rachel, he hesitated. Something inside him, so used to control, was being quietly shaken. He didn't know who this woman was, but he knew one thing. His daughter had allowed something that even he couldn't anymore. "Thank you," he said at last, his tone clipped, almost involuntary. Rachel simply replied, "She just needed someone who listens with the heart." Ben didn't know what to say. He simply stood there, watching Rachel return to her invisible routine, pushing the bucket, slipping on her gloves as if nothing had happened. But something had, and for the first time in a long while, he felt that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't in control of anything at all. Rachel was already walking toward the supply closet when she heard quick footsteps and harsh voices echoing behind her. She turned and saw two airport security guards coming toward her, faces stern and posture aggressive. One of them, the taller one, with a furrowed brow and a radio clip to his shoulder, pointed directly at her. "You!" "Stop." "Right there," he ordered firmly. Rachel stopped, confused. She still held her rubber gloves in her hands. "Is something wrong?" The younger guard crossed his arms, looking down at her. "We received a report. An employee was seen interacting with an unaccompanied minor in a restricted area. This is serious." Rachel's eyes widened in disbelief. "A report?" "I was just helping the girl. She was alone, shivering." The older guard cut her off sharply. "You approached the child without authorization. That could be considered misconduct. Inappropriate contact. Do you know what that means?" "She was scared," Rachel insisted, her voice shaking. "I just sat next to her, gave her my sweatshirt. I didn't do anything wrong." More voices began to stir around them. A couple waiting for a flight stopped to watch. A cafe worker peeked from behind the counter. The commotion drew attention. Rachel felt her face burn and her stomach twist. Not from guilt, but from injustice. Ben stood a few feet away, holding Sophie in his arms, silently observing. The little girl looked up at him with wide eyes, confused by the sudden chaos. Rachel tried again. "Your daughter was alone." Only, you're dismissed for the night," the older guard cut in. "We're escorting you out of the international terminal. As a precaution." "Dismissed?" Rachel repeated, incredulous. "I still have 2 hours left on my shift." Your supervisor will be notified. Now, please come." "With us," said the younger one, stepping forward and grabbing her arm with unnecessary force. Rachel pulled away instinctively. "Don't push me. I'm not a criminal." At that moment, the cleaning bucket she hadn't returned tipped over, spilling disinfectant across the floor. A strong smell filled the corridor. More eyes turned. Someone muttered, "How shameful." Another discreetly raised a phone to film. Rachel stood in the middle of the corridor, gloves in hand, uniform dirty at the knees, eyes brimming, surrounded by stares that knew nothing, yet judged everything. Ben remained silent. Rachel looked at him for a second. She didn't shout, didn't beg. She just asked, voice breaking with a trace of hope still clinging to justice. "You saw everything, and you're not going to say anything?" Ben pressed his lips together, his eyes unreadable. "This isn't the right time," was all he said. Those 3 words hurt more than the humiliation. Rachel swallowed hard. She wouldn't cry. Not here. As she was escorted out of the VIP terminal, she felt the weight of her uniform on her back and a question pounding in her chest. Why help someone when the world prefers suspicion? From the safety of her father's arms, Sophie reached out toward Rachel. Rachel saw it, but couldn't respond anymore. She was taken away as if she were a threat, but one thing she knew, she wasn't. She was a mother, a woman, and she had done the right thing. Even if no one could see it, Ben Whitaker paced back and forth inside the glass-walled office on the top floor of his company's building in downtown Denver. The view of the snow-covered mountains no longer stirred anything in him. He was restless. Since that moment at the airport, something inside him hadn't let him rest. It was as if that scene, that uniformed woman kneeling on the floor, holding his daughter so gently, had cracked the emotional concrete he'd spent years building. Sophie didn't talk about what happened, but something had shifted in her too. She'd started sleeping without the night terrors, had begun clinging more tightly to the teddy bear she used to ignore. Ben noticed. He always noticed anything involving numbers, risks, mergers. But now he was faced with something he couldn't measure. He called Brandon, his personal assistant, a discreet man in his 50s who could solve any issue with the speed of a human algorithm. I want to know who the employee was that was with my daughter that night at the airport. Ben said, eyes still fixed on his screen. Rachel Monroe. I need everything. Where she lives, who she lives with, background, what she does, and fast. Brandon nodded without showing surprise. Of course, Mr. Whitaker. Any limitations on how it's done? Absolute discretion. I don't want her to know. The following morning, the reports were on his desk. Ben sat alone, while Sophie played quietly in the room next door, flipping. Through the pages with unexpected tension in his jaw, Rachel Monroe, 27, born in Spokane, Washington. No criminal record, no court history, single mother. Lives in a small boarding house in the Five Points neighborhood. Shares the space with 2 other women and her 9-month-old son, Noah, nursing student at a community college. Works the night, shift cleaning at Denver International Airport, overdue bills. Electric bill on a payment plan. No known relatives in Colorado. No government aid, no lawsuits, no complaints. Ben paused. Ran his fingers over his eyes. A heavy silence settled over. The room. He flipped to a photo. A blurry image from a security camera. Rachel was carrying a bag of diapers in one hand, and in the other, a blanket draped over her shoulder, likely Noah. Her face was partially turned toward the camera. Even with the poor quality, something in her expression unsettled him. There was strength, but also exhaustion. Brandon stepped quietly into the room. We also spoke with a former supervisor. She said Rachel was one of the most dedicated employees she ever had. Never missed a shift, never late, cleaned vomit in the bathrooms without complaint, and never asked for anything in return. Ben remained silent. The anger he felt at the airport no longer made sense, and the shame of having said nothing while she was treated like a threat weighed heavier than any excuse. She has no one? He asked, his tone tinged with disbelief. Brandon hesitated. Just her son. Ben closed his eyes for a moment. At that moment, he understood that Rachel wasn't a woman looking for attention. She wasn't waiting for a miracle. She was someone holding up the weight of the world with the arms she had. And even so, she made time to comfort a child that wasn't hers. He stood from his chair, crossed his arms, and looked out at the city through the window. Let me know if she changes, shifts, and I don't want anyone else interfering in her routine without my authorization. Is that clear? Brandon simply replied, Yes, sir. But deep down, Ben wasn't sure what he would do with all of it. He only knew that, for the first time in years, someone had broken the silence in his home. Without saying a single word, to him, 3 days had passed since Rachel was escorted out of the VIP terminal like a threat. She hadn't said a word to her supervisor, just returned to work with her eyes down and her sleeves pulled over her hands. She had bigger things to worry about now. Mrs. Henderson, her downstairs neighbor, had fallen down the stairs the night before and was taken to the hospital with a suspected hip fracture. She wouldn't be able to care for Noah anymore. Rachel spent the night awake, rocking her son in her arms and doing mental math. What she had wouldn't cover the rent. The electricity might be shut off. She'd already missed 2 classes. The only constant was Noah's crying in the early dawn, and she soothed him the only way she knew how. That morning, with dark circles under her eyes and her body drained, she arrived at the airport lobby to return her badge. She assumed she was being fired, but before she could enter the supervisor's office, a familiar voice stopped her from FAM. Behind, Rachel Monroe. She turned slowly. Her heart jumped before she could stop it. Ben Whitaker was there, alone, no suit. He wore dark jeans, a simple gray sweater, and a heavy coat. He looked less polished than the day of her public humiliation, but his eyes were still steady, though somehow more human. Rachel took a breath. Mr. Whitaker. He stepped forward without arrogance, but also without hesitation. We need to talk. Can you spare 5 minutes? She hesitated. Depends on what it's about. Ben didn't look away. Sophie, it's about her. Rachel glanced around, then nodded. They walked toward a quiet area near the covered parking lot. The cold wind sliced the air, but she stood tall. She didn't want to seem vulnerable, though inside she was barely holding it together. Then stopped and spoke in a low voice as if weighing each word. Since that night, Sophie has changed. She sleeps better, started drawing again, talks more, and she asked for you. Rachel frowned, surprised. She did? But You reached her in a way no one has since her mother died, he said, and that's priceless. She lowered her eyes. Not everything that's priceless is valued. Ben swallowed hard. You're right. I made a mistake. I should have said something that day. I stayed silent because I didn't know how to deal with it. Rachel looked up, hurt but steady. And now you do? He took a deep breath. I don't know much, Rachel, but I know my daughter trusts you. And I need someone who can help her find what she lost. Rachel narrowed her eyes. You're offering me a job? Yes, he said, to care for Sophie, part-time, with a signed contract. Benefits, and a fair salary. I don't want you to feel trapped, but I want my daughter to have someone who treats her the way you did. Rachel crossed her arms, thinking, and Noah, will you let me bring my son? Ben hesitated. Ideally, he'd be with someone while you're working. She shook her head bitterly. I have no one, Mr. Whitaker, and no money to pay someone. Either my son comes with me, or I don't accept. Ben drew a long breath. Pride had always been his armor, but something inside him gave way. All right, you can bring him. Will. Make adjustments. Rachel studied him cautiously. It wasn't kindness. It was necessity. And she knew it. Part-time? I need to keep studying, she added. Deal, he replied. You start Monday. Rachel nodded slowly, but didn't smile. She didn't feel gratitude. Not yet. Only survival. As Ben walked away, she stood still, eyes lost on the damp pavement. Noah shifted in the improvised sling strapped to her chest, unaware of everything. She kissed his forehead gently and whispered, It's going to be hard, Mai. Love, but Mommy will figure it out. And deep inside, though she had no idea how, she felt something was about to change. On Monday morning, the iron gate of the Whitaker estate opened with a metallic groan that sounded more like a warning than a welcome. Rachel stepped out of the rideshare car holding Noah against her chest, a simple backpack slung over one shoulder. She wore dark jeans and a worn coat, trying to stand tall despite the biting cold and the tight knot of uncertainty in her chest. House was large, imposing, with massive windows and pale stone walls. Too quiet. No music, no voices, no smell of coffee. Only the sound of her own breathing and her footsteps echoing on the marble floor of the entrance hall. A woman in white answered the door. It was Clara, the housekeeper. Hair pulled in two, a tight bun, cold eyes, voice flat. Mr. Whitaker is in a meeting. The little one is upstairs, room on the right. The crib for your son is set up in the old guest room. Rachel nodded briefly and climbed the stairs slowly, Noah clinging to her neck. The staircase was wide, but the silence clung to it too. Each step echoed the last few years of that house. Clean, orderly, and emotionally vacant. In Sophie's room. The girl was seated at a small white table, coloring with markers. When the door opened, she looked up. Rachel had expected hesitation, but what she saw was relief. Sophie didn't smile, but she didn't pull away either. She just murmured. Softly, eyes lowered, You came. Rachel knelt beside her. I promised, didn't I? The girl nodded. Noah reached out a tiny hand, curious, and Sophie touched it gently with her finger. "He's small," she said. Rachel smiled. "But he already knows how to make himself." "Understood, just like you." They stayed like that for a while, just breathing the same air, sharing the same space. Later, Rachel began to understand the rhythm of the house. Everything was scheduled. Breakfast at 7:15, reading at 9 o'clock, tutoring at 10:30, snack at 11:45, not a single minute unscripted. Meals were portioned, lights had timers, even the toys had designated places. Ben didn't appear that day. He left. Only a note: "I'm in external meetings. If anything comes up, speak with Clara." Rachel spent the afternoon with Sophie, trying to chip away at the walls between them. She sang a children's song, told a story about a girl who talked to the stars, taught Noah to clap his hands. Sophie listened, but didn't let go. It was like she always had one foot ready to run. That evening, Rachel went down to warm a bottle. She found Clara arranging the kitchen with precise robotic movements. "There are rules here, Miss Monroe," she said, eyes fixed on the counter. "No creating routines outside of what's been set. The girl needs stability, not fantasy." Rachel took a breath. Maybe she needs affection. Clara looked at her for a moment. "Don't confuse warmth with interference. I've seen many like you come through here thinking they'd change something. None of them stayed." Rachel held her gaze. "I'm not here to change anything. I just won't pretend this is normal." She climbed the stairs with Noah pressed to her chest and her heart tight. In the guest room, she found an immaculate space, pristine but unwelcoming. The crib was beautiful, but cold. The blanket, hospital white. The walls bare. She laid Noah down gently, sat beside the crib, and brushed a hand over his cheek. Then she looked out the window and saw the glow of the house reflected from the outside, but darkness still inside its soul. Ben returned late that night. Rachel was lying on the small couch in the guest room, still awake. He opened the door. Without knocking. "Clara said you made up a little story," he said from the doorway. "She needed to imagine something beyond these walls," Rachel replied. Unafraid. Ben watched her for a few seconds, then simply said, "Just don't cross any boundaries." Rachel said nothing. But inside she was thinking, boundaries matter. But what if they're trapping a child instead of protecting her? That night she didn't sleep, and she made a decision. For Sophie. For Noah. For herself. She wouldn't be another shadow in that house. Winter had begun to show signs of weariness in Denver, but inside the Whitaker house, the emotional cold remained untouched. And yet Rachel, in her quiet, unobtrusive way, began changing small rhythms without anyone noticing. At least not at first. It started with how she arranged Sophie's books. Instead of stacking them alphabetically, she sorted them by color, letting the girl choose by whatever caught her eye. She replaced the gray toys in the bedroom with more colorful stuffed animals she brought from home, along with some of Noah's own picture books. Already worn from use and love, mornings began to carry a new sound. Rachel's gentle voice reading. Stories woven with a natural warmth, inventing characters that didn't exist on paper but lived deep in the heart. Sophie listened, always in silence, but her once dull eyes started to glow again. One overcast afternoon, while they were drawing with crayons on the veranda floor, Rachel said casually, "When my son started talking, his first word was water. I think it was because it's what he missed most when he was sick." Sophie, mid-drawing a crooked flower, paused. Her small fingers gripped the crayon tighter. Then, softly, as if rediscovering herself, "Flower?" Rachel looked up, surprised. "What, sweetheart?" The girl pointed to her drawing. "It's a flower, like the ones in my mom's yard." Rachel swallowed hard. That last word rang like a forgotten chord. "It's beautiful," she said, gently touching the paper. "Your mom must have loved those flowers." Sophie nodded, then murmured, eyes low, "She used to sing when I got scared." Rachel smiled, her eyes brimming. "Would you like me to sing too?" Sophie hesitated, then whispered, "Yes." That afternoon, Sophie laughed. Really laughed, like a child who still carried inside her a piece of who she used to be. Rachel felt the laughter vibrate in the air like a miracle, and couldn't hold back her tears. On alternating weekends, Rachel began bringing Noah for a few hours with Ben's permission. Sophie grew instantly attached. She liked watching him crawl across the expensive rugs, liked placing pillows to keep him from bumping his head. She started imitating him, making faces, hiding toys just to watch him look for them. "He's funny," Sophie would say, her voice now steadier. "He thinks you're even funnier," Rachel would reply as Noah burst into giggles in her lap. Ben began to notice the changes. Sophie's drawings had colors again, words came more freely. The night terrors had vanished. More than once, Ben stood outside her room, just listening. The sound of his daughter's laughter, that sound he hadn't heard since the funeral, was almost disorienting. One evening, watching Rachel perform a makeshift puppet show full of invented characters, Ben leaned on the doorway and said, "You're good with her." Rachel looked up, calm and steady. "I just let her breathe." Ben was quiet. He'd never thought of it that way. Breathing, something so automatic and so absent in that house. Noah, seeing Ben at the door, reached out his arms. "Da!" Ben stepped forward, uncertain, picked him up clumsily. Rachel didn't interfere, just watched. Noah giggled, content. Sophie approached her father, touched the sleeve of his shirt and said, "He likes you." Ben looked at her, surprised. "You like him?" he asked. Sophie nodded. "But I like it better when you stay here." Rachel felt the air shift. Ben said nothing, but his eyes spoke more than any words could. That night, something invisible began to unravel, and something precious, delicate, began to grow. Rachel woke early that Monday. It was the day she would officially begin her practical internship at the Montbello Community Clinic. After months balancing work at the Whitaker House, caring for Noah, and attending night classes, that small step forward meant more than just a professional milestone. It was her quiet attempt to rebuild her dignity. As she prepared Noah's bottle, he played with a spoon on the tile floor of their tiny studio apartment. The sound of her baby's laughter was her strength. She slipped on her white lab coat with pride, tied her hair into a practical bun, kissed her son's forehead, and stepped out the door. What Rachel didn't know was that, by that same morning, her name was already spreading across social media. It all started with an anonymous post on a local gossip page, a collage of photos pulled from the airport's old security system. There she was, cleaning bathrooms, hauling trash bags, kneeling in her worn blue uniform. The caption was venomous. "This is the new nanny of millionaire Benjamin Whitaker." Coincidence? Or another one who knows exactly where to sink her claws? Within minutes, the comments rolled in. Low blow. Literally, the likes multiplied. The cruelty spread like wildfire. They called Rachel an opportunist, a gold digger, a fake. Someone even made edits with images of Noah mocking him. They dug up her public academic records and laughed at how she dropped out of high school for a year before going back. At the Whitaker House, Ben received a call from one of the company's board advisors. "You're trending, Ben. They're calling you the naive widower." This could hurt investor confidence. Ben clenched the phone. Who started it? An ex-housekeeper. Let go 3 months ago. She claims you replaced the entire staff with an unqualified woman who came out of nowhere, And unfortunately, the public's eating it up. Across town, Rachel was already noticing the looks at the clinic. The supervisor, a strict woman known for being neutral, called her into a private room. "Rachel, this situation's out of control. We can't allow patients to see your face linked to this kind of content. The board has asked for your immediate dismissal." Rachel froze. "I didn't do anything wrong. All I did was work." The supervisor sighed. "I know. But unfortunately, in this country ... sometimes all it takes is someone pointing a finger and we become the enemy." With no chance to defend herself, Rachel handed in her badge. She walked out of the clinic with wet eyes and empty hands. On the ride back, she called Ben. He answered on the third try. "Did you see what they're saying about me?" she asked. Trying to steady her voice, Ben hesitated. "I saw." "You know it's a lie," she pressed. "You know who I am." "Rachel, it's out of control. My advisors are alarmed. I have to protect the company's image, my daughter's." "Protect? And what about me? What about my son? You're just going to let me burn alone?" Her voice cracked, more from heartbreak than rage. On the other end of the line, Ben's silence was worse than anything he could have said. Rachel hung up. That same day, she packed up Noah's few clothes and toys, stuffing everything into 2 battered suitcases. She left the house where, for weeks, she had tried to plant something that was never hers to keep. Sophie cried, trapped in the housekeeper's arms, unable to understand why the woman who had brought laughter back was. Leaving, Rachel knelt one last time before the girl. "You are stronger than you think. Never forget that." Then, with Noah in her arms and pain in her eyes, she walked away. And didn't look back. Silence had returned to the Whitaker house like a heavy fog. It was the same kind of silence as before, cold, methodical, comfortable for those who avoid feeling. But now, it came laced with absence. And that changed everything. Sophie no longer ate properly. She refused the tutor, rejected her toys, and spent hours sitting on the bedroom floor, clinging to the teddy bear Rachel had given her during their last weekend together. She didn't cry, which might have been even worse. She just stayed quiet. Ben watched her from a distance. He tried to connect, but Sophie averted her gaze. Once, he attempted to tell a story, one he vaguely remembered from when his wife was still alive. Sophie listened for 2 minutes, then whispered. She told it better. Ben didn't reply. He just felt the invisible weight of his choices collapsing over his shoulders. Noah was gone too, and with him, the warmth that had melted the cold from the halls. No more clapping sounds, no spontaneous laughter, no clumsy steps across the Persian rug. All of it had vanished. Even Clara, always composed, murmured one evening, "She's not sleeping." Miss Rachel made a difference here. Ben nodded, but said nothing. That night, he scrolled through old files on his phone. He paused on a video taken by accident. Rachel reading a children's book to Sophie while Noah napped beside them. Sophie laughed out loud at the end, her head resting against Rachel's arm. Ben paused the video, took a deep breath. The next day, he went to the old building where Rachel lived, climbed the 3 floors with hesitant steps. The hallway smelled of mildew and reheated soup. He knocked on door 3B. Rachel opened it with Noah in her arms, wearing an old sweatshirt and deep circles under her eyes. The moment she saw Ben, her body tensed. "What are you here for?" she asked bluntly. Ben held an envelope in one hand. I wanted to see you, and to apologize." "For what happened?" Rachel stared at him, unflinching. "You didn't protect me," she said. "You stayed silent when the whole world spit on me. Because it was easier." He inhaled slowly. "I didn't know how to handle it." "You did know," she corrected, softly. "You just chose not to." Noah stirred in her arms and she gently rocked him, then looked back at Ben. You hired me because I was invisible, but when I started to exist too much, I became a problem. When I brought color back to your daughter, I became a threat. Ben lowered his eyes. Rachel continued, voice calm but resolute, I don't accept. Love where there's no respect. Not for me, not for my son. We've been humiliated enough. He offered the envelope. These are your pending payments, and more than that. It's the least I can do. She didn't take it. I'll accept what's fair, but I won't accept emotional crumbs. What you took from me, Ben, wasn't just a job. It was solid ground. Ben swallowed hard. He didn't try to explain. Didn't try to win her back. He just listened, and in that moment, he saw something he'd never fully recognized before. A whole woman. Wounded, yes, but standing. Head held high. Even amid the wreckage, Rachel looked down at Noah and whispered, We'll be okay. In our own way. Ben took a step back. Before turning to leave, he murmured, Sophie misses you. Every day. Rachel gave a small nod. Said nothing. And then, with the same quiet strength he'd come with, Ben walked away. The following months passed like leaves dragged by the wind, slow on the outside but chaotic within. Rachel picked herself up in the most honest way she knew, step by step, tear by tear. After being fired from the clinic and moving out of the Whitaker's house, she spent weeks job hunting while picking up gigs as a caregiver for the elderly and doing occasional house cleanings in the suburbs. There were nights when she had to choose between buying milk for Noah or paying for transportation to college. But she didn't give in. She kept studying. She kept trying. She kept being a mother with an exhausted body but a lifted soul. Until one April morning, she got the call that seemed unlikely. A position had opened up as a nursing technician at a public hospital in Denver. It was far from home, poorly paid, but it was hers. The first time she wore the white coat with her badge clipped to her pocket, Rachel cried in the locker room bathroom. Not out of weakness, but relief. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to hide who she was. She moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment on a tree-lined street, simple, but full of life. The kitchen barely fit 2 people, the carpet was stained, and the heater made a strange noise, but there was peace there. Noah got his first little room, with light blue walls and planets stuck on with tape. He clapped every time he saw the moon above his bed. Rachel built her life little by little with second-hand furniture. But first-rate love, there was hope in that space. There was history. And there was dignity. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Ben Whitaker was no longer the man he used to be. He began to avoid social events, declined invitations to panels, canceled interviews. Gradually, he swapped the corporate calendar for Sophie's school schedule. He took her to therapy, swimming lessons, simple outings he'd never been around to do before. He learned how to make mac and cheese, braid her hair, listen to the pauses between words. For the first time in his life, Ben was learning how to be a father, not just a provider. But nothing filled the space Rachel had left. He saw it every day in his daughter's eyes. "Daddy," Sophie said one afternoon, drawing in the corner of the room. "If Rachel saw this drawing, do you think she'd remember me?" Ben knelt beside her. "She never forgot you." The girl looked him in the eyes, then take it to her. "But I want to give it. I want her to see." The next week, Ben walked through the front desk of the hospital where Rachel now worked. He had no security, no suit, no CEO posture. He wore jeans, a simple hoodie, and held his daughter's hand tightly, like a man who had lost too much to keep making the same mistakes. Rachel was at the end of her shift. She wore a wrinkled lab coat, her hair in a loose bun, and carried a clipboard with patient records. The exhaustion in her shoulders was evident, but her eyes still held light. When she saw them, she stopped. There was a silence between them, dense, filled with unspoken memories. Sophie was the first to move. She ran up to Rachel with the drawing in her hands, folded carefully. "I made it for you," she said, her voice still timid but determined. Rachel knelt down. She opened the paper carefully. It was a crayon drawing, colored with the innocence only a child knows. Sophie, Rachel, and Noah were drawn holding hands, smiling under a blue sky with a crooked yellow sun. In the bottom corner, in big letters, it said, "You healed my heart." Rachel felt the ground tremble beneath her feet. Her eyes welled up, but she took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. "Thank you, Sophie," she said, hugging the girl tightly. "This is the most beautiful gift I've ever received." Ben stepped closer. His eyes were misty, but he didn't hide it. For the first time, he wasn't there to control anything. He was just himself, an imperfect man trying to do the right thing. "She insisted on coming," he said, voice low. "But the truth is, I needed to see you too." Rachel stood up. Her heart was pounding, but her posture was firm. She looked at him with the calm of someone who owed nothing to anyone anymore. "You seem different," she said. "I'm trying to be," he replied. "Going to therapy, learning from my mistakes, trying to be less blind." She crossed her arms, no anger, just truth. "I don't want someone who needs me to change. And I don't want to change anyone either." Ben nodded, sincerity in his eyes. "I know. I just wanted you to know that I'm listening now, really listening." Rachel looked at Sophie, who stood a little farther back, then looked out the hospital window where the sun was beginning to dip behind the buildings. The world outside was still busy, chaotic, unequal, but inside her, something was at peace. Then she replied, in a voice full of something between forgiveness and freedom, "I don't want to be saved. And I don't want to save anyone. But if someone is going to walk beside me, it has to be with truth, with lightness, and with courage." Ben didn't try to hold her back, didn't pressure her, didn't ask for an answer. He just smiled. For the first time in a long time, unafraid of seeming vulnerable, Rachel stroked Sophie's hair and bent down to her level. "I never stopped thinking about you." "Me neither," the girl replied. Noah appeared, toddling down the corridor. He shouted, "Mama!" and ran to Rachel, wrapping himself around her leg. Ben watched him with respect. There was a boy growing up with love, and a woman who had rebuilt everything on her own. Rachel picked him up, looked at Ben one last time, and then narrated, maybe to herself, or maybe to whoever was willing to listen, "I thought I was just soothing a lost child, but I was the one who found the way again." And as the hallway emptied and the lights began to turn off one by one, what remained wasn't an artificial happy ending. It was a true beginning. Because love, when it's real, doesn't show up to fill holes. It shows up to walk beside you at the right time with the right person in the simplest way possible. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments. I'd really love to know how this story touched you. If it moved you in any way, like the video, share it with someone who also believes in the power of true love. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories. Before you go, I've picked out another touching story that will definitely reach even deeper into your heart. It's worth watching.